Usually when we look at the human body, or really any living thing for that matter, there's this expectation of a master plan.
Right, like engineering.
Exactly. Like you look at the valves of a human heart or, I don't know, the aerodynamic curve of a bird's wing. It just looks perfectly intentionally designed for its specific job.
Oh, totally. It looks like a blueprint that some brilliant architect just drew up in a laboratory somewhere. Every part has a distinct purpose, moving in total harmony.
But then you step into the world of evolutionary biology, and suddenly that blueprint just completely vanishes.
Poof, gone.
Right. We're looking at a landscape shaped not by a conscious designer, but by this invisible, totally relentless filter.
It's the absolute definition of an automated mechanical process. I mean, it's a system entirely without a mind, without a goal, and yet it produces all this breathtaking complexity we see around us.
Which is mind-blowing. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are speaking directly to you. Yes, you the listener.
The one doing the hard work.
Exactly. You might be rigorously prepping for the TEAS or HESI's nursing entrance exams. Or maybe you're just someone with this tense, insatiable curiosity about how the natural world actually works.
Which is the best kind of curiosity.
It really is. So we're diving deep into a massive stack of notes on one of the most famous yet profoundly misunderstood concepts in all of science, natural selection.
And just to be clear, our goal today isn't to help you memorize, like, a list of vocab words for a multiple choice test.
No, definitely not.
We want you to deeply understand the underlying mechanism behind how species evolve and adapt. Because grasping this mechanism, it isn't just about passing an exam. It is absolutely crucial for modern clinical medicine.
Which is exactly why you're here as our guide, to help us, cut through the dense academic jargon and connect these core biological concepts straight to real-world clinical practice.
I am ready to get into it.
Awesome. But to understand those complex medical applications, I feel like we first have to strip away the terminology. We need to look at the basic mechanical logic of how life adapts, right from first principles.
Yeah, if we break natural selection down to its bare metal, it really requires exactly 3 conditions to be present.
Just 3.
Just 3. If you have these 3 things, natural selection isn't just possible, it is inevitable. Number 1 is variation.
Okay, meaning individuals in a population have to differ from one another in some way.
Exactly. Number 2 is heredity. At least some of that variation must be able to be passed down from a parent to their offspring.
Right. It has to be genetic, not just like a scar you got.
Precisely. And number 3, this is the big one, is differential reproductive success.
Differential reproductive success, meaning some of those variants leave more surviving offspring than others, just simply because that specific trait gives them an advantage. Or a disadvantage, I guess.
Yeah, in their specific environment. And a crucial point that test takers really need to hammer into their minds, this process does not act on individuals over their single lifetimes.
Right.
An individual organism does not evolve. Natural selection acts on entire populations across generations. It has absolutely no intention, no foresight, and no end goal.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because that lack of intention is where I think the human brain really gets tripped up.
Oh, constant.
People often talk about evolution like it's an organism trying to level up. Like a character in a video game trying to get better armor or something.
It's trying fallacy, yeah.
But it's really just a mechanical filter. I like to think of it like a physical sieve or a mesh screen. If you pour a bucket of different sized rocks over a sieve, the sieve isn't trying to select the small rocks.
Right. A sieve has no brain.
Exactly. It's just a structural reality that only the small rocks can pass through the holes and the large ones just get left behind.
That's a perfect analogy. The environment acts as that sieve. And that actually brings up one of the most massive misconceptions we see on nursing exams, which revolves around the biological definition of the word fitness.
Oh, yeah. Survival of the fittest.
Right. Because in everyday language, when we say someone is fit, we mean they go to the gym, they are physically strong, they have great cardiovascular health.
They can run a marathon.
Exactly. But in biology, fitness has absolutely zero to do with physical strength.
Wait, really? So it's not the survival of the strongest or the fastest?
Not at all. Biological fitness is defined strictly as relative reproductive success.
Meaning?
Babies? Basically, yeah. It is simply a measure of how many viable fertile offspring a given genotype produces compared to others in the population.
Okay, give me an example of that.
Imagine you have a weak, slow, short-lived organism, but somehow it manages to produce 10 surviving fertile offspring.
Okay, a weak little guy with 10 kids.
Now compare that to a massive, incredibly strong, incredibly fast organism that lives a long time but dies without ever reproducing.
The ultimate gym bro, but no kids.
Exactly. Biologically speaking, the weak, slow organism is technically infinitely more fit than the strong one.
Because the weak one passed through the sieve. Its traits are the ones making it to the next generation. The strong one's traits hit a dead end, so all that muscle mass was biologically useless.
Precisely. A trait is only favored if it results in more surviving, reproducing offspring. If brute strength doesn't translate into more babies that actually survive to reproductive age, natural selection just does not care about it.
Laying out this mechanical logic like this, it makes it seem incredibly obvious to us now. It's just a numbers game of who survives to breed.
A ruthless numbers game.
But it's wild to think about how this filter was discovered before anyone knew what was actually passing through the sieve. Like, humanity had no concept of genes or DNA when this was figured out.
Which is the most amazing part. That history really centers on Charles Darwin and another scientist named Alfred Russel Wallace.
Darwin gets all the glory, though.
He does, mostly because he did the exhaustive, tedious work that made the theory famous. He actually began developing the idea way back in the 1830s, right after his 5-year voyage on the HMS Beagle.
Ah, the Beagle. This is where the famous Galapagos Islands come in, right? The finches, the tortoises, the mockingbirds.
Yes. Darwin observed this incredible variation among these species from island to island. But the real light bulb moment came later when he read a 1798 essay by an economist named Thomas Malthus.
An economist, not a biologist.
An economist. Malthus argued that human populations naturally grow much faster than food supplies can grow.
Okay, so more mouths than meals.
Exactly. And this inevitably produces a constant, desperate struggle for existence.
Because there's simply never enough resources to sustain unlimited population growth, someone is going to starve.
Right. And Darwin took that economic concept and applied it to biology. He realized that in this brutal struggle for existence in nature, whichever individuals just happened to have traits better suited to their local circumstances would be the ones to survive and breed.
Just blind luck of having the right traits.
But here's the wild part. Darwin sat on this theory for roughly 2 decades.
Wait, 2 decades? He had the key to biology and just, kept it in a drawer.
He did. Fear of the social and religious backlash played a huge role. He knew how explosive the idea was.
I mean, yeah, it completely rewrote human history.
He only rushed to publish because in 1858 he received a letter from Alfred Russel Wallace, who was working way out in the Malay Archipelago.
Oh no, did Wallace figure it out too?
He independently arrived at the exact same mechanism. So, to be fair to both men, their ideas were presented jointly at the Linnean Society of London in 1858.
And then Darwin published the big one.
Yep. He published his massive book on the origin of species in 1859.
So at the time, Darwin was really pushing back against the established ideas of the era. He was reacting against special creation, right? The idea that all species were permanently fixed and created exactly as they are.
Yes, that was the dominant view.
But he was also reacting against a guy named Jean-Baptiste Lamarck.
Oh, Lamarck. He proposed a theory in 1809 known as the inheritance of acquired characteristics.
This is the famous giraffe example. Lamarck thought that a giraffe stretches its neck really hard over its lifetime to reach high leaves, and because it stretched its neck during its life, its babies are just born with longer necks.
Which implies conscious effort and intention driving biological change.
Which goes back to the trying fallacy.
Exactly. Darwin said no effort is required. The giraffes weren't trying to evolve, it's just that the giraffes that were born with randomly longer necks didn't starve, so they were the only ones left to have babies.
Okay, but I want to push back on something here, just as a proxy for the listener's curiosity.
Sure, go for it.
If Darwin had no concept of DNA, and we know Gregor Mendel's foundational work on genetics wasn't even published until 1866 and was totally ignored by the scientific community until 1900. How does Darwin's 1859 theory actually hold up to modern biology?
That's a great question.
Because he was flying completely blind regarding the actual physical mechanism of heredity.
What's fascinating here is how the scientific method naturally corrects and updates itself. Darwin didn't know how traits were passed down. His own guesses about heredity were actually completely wrong.
He thought it was like mixing paint, didn't he?
Something like that. Yeah, gemmules. It wasn't until the 1930s and 1940s that biologists finally took Darwin's mechanism of selection and physically fused it with Mendelian genetics.
The DNA part.
Right. This fusion is called the modern synthesis.
So what did this modern synthesis actually do to the theory?
It reframed natural selection from this sort of vague 19th century concept into precise, measurable mathematical terms. Thanks to the modern synthesis, we now define natural selection as the shifting of allele frequencies within a gene pool.
Allele frequencies, okay. An allele is just a variant form of a gene, right?
Yep, just a gene variant. So evolution by natural selection is literally just tracking the percentage of specific genetic variants in a population over time. It basically gave Darwin's sieve a mathematical foundation.
Tracking allele frequencies mathematically sounds incredibly abstract, though, like something that would take millennia to observe. Do we just have to trust that this invisible genetic shift happens over millions of years? Or can we actually see this sieve operating on a human timescale?
Oh, we can absolutely see it, and we have incredible concrete evidence of it happening incredibly fast. Let's look at 3 classic examples from the sources. First, the peppered moth in England.
Industrial melanism. That is a textbook classic.
It really is. From 1848 through the 1950s, scientists documented this shift in real time. So the peppered moth exists in 2 forms, a light, speckled form and a dark form.
Okay.
Before the Industrial Revolution, the light moths made up almost the entire population. They were perfectly camouflaged against the light-colored lichen growing on tree bark. The birds would just easily spot and eat the rare dark moths.
So the birds are the sieve in this scenario.
Exactly. But then coal-burning factories spread thick black soot all over England. The soot killed the lichen and blackened all the tree trunks.
Oh, wow.
Suddenly, the camouflage advantage completely flipped. The light moths stood out like beacons on the black trees, and the dark moths were completely hidden.
So the environment changed, which means the filter changed.
Drastically.
Yeah.
By 1895, in industrial Manchester, surveys found the dark moths now made up 98% of the population.
98%. That's a massive shift.
Huge. And later, biologists like Bernard Kettlewell ran experiments confirming that birds were preferentially eating whichever moth didn't blend into the local background.
See, the moths didn't try to change color. The ones that didn't match simply got eaten. And what about Darwin's finches? Because they didn't just stay in a museum as a 19th century relic.
Not at all. 2 modern biologists, Peter and Rosemary Grant, have lived on and off a tiny Galapagos island called Daphne Major since 1973.
Talk about dedication.
Seriously, they essentially measured the beak of every single bird on the island, generation after generation. In 1977, a brutal drought hit the island.
Which means the food supply evaporated.
Right. The small, soft seeds that the medium ground finches normally ate were entirely wiped out. All that was left were these large, incredibly tough seeds.
Oh.
So if a bird had a slightly smaller beak, it physically couldn't crack the tough seeds, and it starved. Roughly 85% of the finch population died in a single year.
85%. That is a massive Malthusian bottleneck.
It was devastating, but the birds that survived happened to have slightly larger, deeper beaks. When those survivors had babies, the average beak depth of the entire population measurably increased.
Why?
The shift happened in just one single generation.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because both of those take years or decades. The third example from the research shatters the misconception that evolution only happens slowly.
Oh, the megaplate.
Yes. This is the megaplate experiment from 2016, run by Roy Kishoni's lab at Harvard and the Technion.
It is honestly one of the most visually stunning experiments in modern biology.
For those who haven't seen it, they took this massive, giant petri dish, the megaplate, and they divided it into bands. The outside edges had 0 antibiotics.
Safe zones for the bacteria.
Right. The next band in had just enough antibiotics to kill normal E. coli bacteria. The next band had 10 times the lethal dose, then 100 times. And the center band had 1,000 times the lethal dose of antibiotics.
A literal death zone.
Yeah. So they put normal bacteria on the edges and literally just filmed it.
And what the camera captured was natural selection happening in real time. The bacteria grow until they hit the first antibiotic boundary and they stop. They die.
Because of the drug.
Right. But out of millions of bacteria, by pure random mutation, 1 or 2 develop a resistance trait. Those survivors cross the line, multiply, and fill that band.
And then they hit the next boundary.
And the cycle repeats.
On camera, you see these branching lineages of bacteria physically crawling their way toward the center. They evolved to survive 1,000 times the lethal dose of antibiotics in just 10 to 12 days.
Incredible.
Over a long weekend, basically.
And the underlying mechanics linking all 3 of these examples are identical. Whether it's a bird eating a moth that doesn't blend in, a drought destroying soft seeds, or a synthetic antibiotic wiping out susceptible bacteria. The environment is simply applying a filter to random variation.
And those that pass the filter survive and reproduce. But that megaplate experiment, it isn't just a cool lab trick you watch on YouTube. It is a terrifying preview of what nurses, doctors, and healthcare professionals face every single day. We transition from the petri dish directly to the patient.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, human medical treatments are now the very environment driving selective pressure. We have become the sieve.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
So when a patient gets an antibiotic prescription and they feel better after 3 days, so they just stop taking it early, they aren't just being non-compliant.
No, they're doing something much worse.
They're basically running a boot camp for superbugs. You kill off all the weak bacteria, but you leave the strongest, most resistant ones alive inside you.
And those strong ones multiply.
And they completely take over.
Which is why antibiotic resistance is currently one of the leading global health threats. For example, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, or MRSA, emerged within about 2 years of the antibiotic methicillin being introduced in 1960.
Just 2 years.
And the exact same evolutionary logic governs why HIV requires combination drug therapy.
Because prescribing one single HIV drug basically guarantees that a random mutation will eventually make a viral variant resistant to it, right?
Yep.
And that variant will survive and take over the patient's body.
You have to use multiple drugs simultaneously to make the environmental filter so complex that no single mutation can sneak through. We see this exact same evolutionary arms race with cancer, too.
Like with chemotherapy.
Exactly. Chemotherapy kills susceptible tumor cells, but if it leaves behind even a few resistant clones, those clones enrich the tumor, leading to a cancer recurrence that no longer responds to the original drug.
The environment isn't always a synthetic drug we introduce, though. Sometimes the human body's own genetic landscape is the filter, which leads to some incredibly counterintuitive survival strategies. Let's look at sickle cell anemia.
This is the textbook case of what biologists call heterozygote advantage. This is highly relevant for nursing students because it explains why a deadly genetic disease persists in specific populations.
Right, because normally you'd think natural selection should ruthlessly eliminate a genetic disease like sickle cell anemia, because it is harmful.
It causes immense suffering, yes.
But in certain parts of the world, specifically malaria-endemic regions of Africa, the sickle cell allele persists at very high frequencies.
The reason lies in the specific environmental filter. So everyone has 2 copies of this gene. If you have 2 normal copies, you are highly susceptible to severe malaria, which can be fatal.
Okay.
If you have 2 copies of the mutated sickle cell allele, you develop sickle cell disease, which is also very severe and often fatal.
Both extremes are really bad. But if you are a heterozygote, meaning you carry 1 normal copy and 1 mutated sickle cell copy, you get the magic middle ground.
You don't get severe sickle cell disease, and that 1 mutated copy significantly protects you against severe malaria.
That's fascinating.
Therefore, in an environment where malaria is constantly trying to kill people, the heterozygotes have the highest relative reproductive success. They pass the sieve. So natural selection actively maintains a disease-causing allele in the population purely because of the survival benefit it confers in that specific environment.
It shows how incredibly rigorous and tested this framework is in biology. Yet, despite being the foundation of modern medicine, natural selection is deeply misunderstood by the public. Let's dig into the mechanics of some of the major debates and misconceptions within this field.
It definitely helps to differentiate how natural selection interacts with other evolutionary forces. For instance, natural selection is driven by survival advantage. But evolution can also happen entirely by accident through a process called genetic drift.
Genetic drift is fascinating because it completely ignores how fit an organism is. It's when allele frequencies change purely by random chance.
Right, the luck of the draw.
Imagine an island with a population of green and brown beetles. A massive hurricane hits the island and randomly wipes out 90% of the beetles. It just so happens that mostly green beetles survived, not because being green helped them weather the storm, but just because they were standing in the right place.
The population evolved, but not through adaptation. It's a statistical phenomenon, most powerful in very small populations, known as a bottleneck effect.
And this operates alongside gene flow too, right?
Yep. Gene flow is the migration of individuals between populations, bringing their genes with them. And both of those rely on mutation, which is the ultimate source of all new genetic variation.
Because selection cannot invent new traits.
Exactly. It can only filter the mutations that already happen to exist.
This brings up some of the massive debates scientists have had over how this filter operates over deep time. Because Darwin envisioned evolution as a slow, steady march, right?
Darwin was a strict gradualist. He thought evolution was a slow, constant crawl. But in 1972, paleontologists Niles Eldredge and Stephen Jay Gould challenged this with a theory called punctuated equilibrium.
Great name for a theory.
Right. When they looked at the fossil record, they didn't see a slow, steady change. They saw a species staying physically stable for millions of years, a state of stasis. Then suddenly, in a geologically short burst, new species would rapidly appear.
Usually around major environmental changes or speciation events, I'm assuming.
Exactly. They weren't saying natural selection was wrong, they were arguing about its tempo. If the environment stays stable, the sieve stays stable, and organisms don't change much.
But when the environment rapidly shifts, selection pressure ramps up intensely.
Right. We also see major debates over the level at which selection operates. Early in the 20th century, you would often hear biologists argue that a trait evolved for the good of the species.
The idea of group selection, where an individual might sacrifice itself so the broader species could survive, like lemmings jumping off a cliff, which is a myth, by the way.
Yeah, a complete myth. And that idea of group selection was largely dismantled by the 1970s. Biologists like George C. Williams and later Richard Dawkins, with his concept of the selfish gene, demonstrated that selection overwhelmingly acts at the level of individual genes competing to reproduce.
Think about it mechanically, right? If a selfless gene causes an organism to sacrifice itself before breeding, that gene is removed from the gene pool. Meanwhile, the selfish gene that causes an organism to save itself and reproduce well, that will multiply. Traits that help the species as a whole but hurt the individual organism's own chances of reproducing, mathematically just cannot spread.
It's all about what gets passed down, which leads us directly into some quick misconceptions. Evolution has a goal.
We covered that. It's a blind filter.
Right. How about humans evolved from modern monkeys?
Oh, I hate that one. Humans and modern monkeys simply share a common ancestor that lived millions of years ago, which no longer exists. We are cousins, not descendants.
Nailed it. And the classic, natural selection is just the theory, so it's a guess.
In science, the word theory does not mean a hunch. It means a heavily substantiated framework supported by massive evidence, like the theory of gravity or the germ theory of disease. And it's really important to pause here because looking back at history, we see how dangerous it is when people try to apply this biological mechanism to human politics. As we look at these next historical examples, I just want to speak directly to you listening. Our goal isn't to validate the politics of the era. In fact, quite the opposite, but to neutrally examine how the science was so deeply misunderstood and abused.
It's a dark history.
It is. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, this descriptive biological science was horrifyingly hijacked.
It really started with the phrase survival of the fittest, which, surprisingly, Darwin didn't even invent. A philosopher named Herbert Spencer coined that phrase in 1864.
Oh, a philosopher.
Yeah. People took that philosophical phrase, merged it with Darwin's biology, and created social Darwinism. They used a biological mechanism to justify social and economic inequality, brutal colonialism, and incredibly coercive eugenics programs.
And we see this misapplication culminating in forced sterilization laws in the United States that stayed on the books well into the mid-20th century, and of course, the horrific, extreme extension of these ideas by the Nazi regime.
Which is just awful. This raises an important question about the boundaries of science. Natural selection is purely a descriptive account of how allele frequencies change in a gene pool. That's all it is.
It's just math.
Yes, it describes what is happening in nature. It carries absolutely no moral instruction about how humans ought to treat one another. Applying a blind biological mechanism as a prescription for human social policy is a profound category error.
It was a failure of ethics masquerading as science.
Beautifully put.
A descriptive science of gene frequencies can never tell us how to build a just society. It's absolutely crucial for anyone entering healthcare to understand how dangerous that category error can be, so we never repeat it.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, let's briefly recap our primary mission. We've seen that natural selection is fundamentally driven by three things: variation, heredity, and differential reproductive success.
The big three.
It acts blindly on allele frequencies across populations over generations, Grasping this isn't just about acing the TEAS or HESI exams. It's about understanding why antibiotic stewardship matters, why combination therapies exist, and ultimately how to save lives in a clinical setting.
It genuinely changes how you see the world, and I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. The sources briefly mention artificial selection, which is when humans act as the sieve, like how we bred wild wolves into all the different domestic dog breeds, or how Darwin studied pigeon breeders.
Right, humans, rather than nature, chose who got to reproduce.
The human preference became the environmental filter. But if natural selection is fundamentally driven by environmental filters, and humans are now using modern advanced medicine to completely alter those environmental filters, for example, keeping people with severe genetic diseases alive long enough to reproduce and pass on those genes, are humans fundamentally blurring the line between natural selection and artificial selection when it comes to the future of our own species?
Oh, wow.
Are we now the architects of our own evolutionary filter?
That is a staggering thought. The blueprint might have been missing at the beginning, but maybe modern medicine is starting to draw one now. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep challenging what you think you know, and we hope you never look at the natural world or a hospital chart the same way again.